Chapter 16 of Colonel Quaritch, V.C. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Colonel Quaritch, V.C. by H. Rider Haggard. Chapter 16. The House with the Red Pillars. 2 days after his receipt of the second letter from the Tiger, Mr. Quest announced to his wife that he was going to London on business connected with the bank, and expected to be away for a couple of nights. She laughed straight out. "Really, William," she said, "you are a most consummate actor. I wonder that you would think it worth while to keep up the farce with me. Well, I hope that Edith is not going to be very expensive this time, because we don't seem to be too rich just now, and you see there is no more of my money for her to have." Mr. Quest winced visibly beneath this bitter satire, which his wife uttered with a smile of infantile innocence playing upon her face, but he made no reply. She knew too much. Only in his heart he wondered what fate she should mete out to him if ever she got possession of the whole truth, and the thought made him tremble. It seemed to him that the owner of that baby face could be terribly merciless in her vengeance, and that those soft white hands would close round the throat of a man she hated and utterly destroy him. Now, if never before, he realised that between him and this woman there must be enmity and a struggle to the death, and yet, strangely enough, he still loved her. Mr. Quest reached London about 3 o'clock, and his first act was to drive to Causey and Sons, where he was informed that old Mr. Causey was much better, and having heard that he was coming to town, had sent to say that he particularly wished to see him, especially about the Honham Castle estates. Accordingly, Mr. Quest drove on to the old gentleman's mansion in Grosvenor Street, where he asked for Mr. Edward Causey. The footman said that Mr. Edward was upstairs, and showed him into a study while he went to tell him of the arrival of his visitor. Mr. Quest glanced round the luxuriantly furnished room, which he saw was occupied by Edward himself, for some letters directed in his handwriting lay upon the desk, and a velveteen lounging coat that Mr. Quest recognised as belonging to him was hanging over the back of a chair. Mr. Quest's eye, wandering over this coat, was presently caught by the corner of a torn flap of an envelope which projected from one of the pockets. It was of a peculiar bluish tinge, in fact of a hue which was much affected by his wife. Listening for a moment to hear if anybody was coming, he stepped to the coat and extracted the letter. It was in his wife's handwriting, so he took the liberty of hastily transferring it to his own pocket. In another minute Edward Causey entered, and the two men shook hands. "How do you do, Quest?" said Edward. "I think that the old man is going to pull through this bout. He is helpless, but keen as a knife, and has all the important matters from the bank referred to him. I believe that he will last a year yet, but he will scarcely allow me out of his sight. He preaches away about business the whole day long, and says that he wants to communicate the fruits of his experience to me before it is too late. He wishes to see you, so if you will, you had better come up." Accordingly they went upstairs to a large and luxurious bedroom on the first floor, where the stricken man lay upon a patent couch. When Mr. Quest and Edward Causey entered, a lady, old Mr. Causey's eldest daughter, put down a paper out of which she had been reading the money article aloud, and, rising, informed her father that Mr. Quest had come. "Mr. Quest?" said the old man in a thin voice. "Ah, yes, I want to see Mr. Quest very much. Go away now, Anna, you can come back by and by. Business before pleasure. Most instructive though, that sudden fall in American railways. But I thought it would come, and I got Causey and Son clear of them." And he sniffed with satisfaction and looked as though he would have rubbed his hands if he had not been physically incapacitated from so doing. Mr. Quest came forward to where the invalid lay. He was a gaunt old man with white hair and a pallid face, which looked almost ghastly in contrast to his black velvet skull cap. So far as Mr. Quest could see, he appeared to be almost totally paralysed, with the exception of his head, neck and left arm, which he could still move a little. His black eyes, however, were full of life and intelligence, and roamed about the room without ceasing. "How do you do, Mr. Quest?" he said. Sorry that I can't shake hands with you, but you see I have been stricken down, though my brain is clear enough, clearer than ever it was, I think. And I ain't going to die yet. Don't think that I am, because I ain't. I may live 2 years more. The doctor says I am sure to live one at least. A lot of money can be made in a year if you keep your eyes open. Once I made 120,000 for Causey and Son in 1 year, and I may do it again before I die. I may make a lot of money. Ah, a lot of money." And his voice went off into a kind of thin scream that was not pleasant to listen to. "I am sure I hope you will, sir," said Mr. Quest politely. "Thank you. Take that for good luck, you know. Well, well, Mr. Quest, things haven't done so bad down in your part of the world. Not at all bad considering the times. I thought we should have to sell that old de la Molle up, but I hear that he is going to pay us off. Can't imagine who has been fool enough to lend him the money. A client of yours, eh? Well, he'll lose it, I expect, and serve him right for his pains. But I am not sorry, for it is unpleasant for a house like ours to have to sell an old client up. Not that his account is worth much, nothing at all. More trouble than profit, or we should not have done it. He's no better than a bankrupt, and the insolvency court is the best place for him. The world is to the rich and the fullness thereof. There's an insolvency court especially provided for de la Molle and his like, empty old windbags with long-sounding names. Let him go there and make room for the men who have made money, he, he, he." And once more his voice went off into a sort of scream. Here Mr. Quest, who had had about enough of this sort of thing, changed the conversation by commencing to comment on various business transactions which he had been conducting on behalf of the house. The old man listened with the greatest interest, his keen black eyes attentively fixed upon the speaker's face, till at last Mr. Quest happened to mention that among others a certain Colonel Quaritch had opened an account with their branch of the bank. "Quaritch," said the old man eagerly. "I know that name. Was he ever in the 105th Foot?" "Yes," said Mr. Quest, who knew everything about everybody. "He was an ensign in that regiment during the Indian Mutiny, where he was badly wounded when still quite young, and got the Victoria Cross. I found it all out the other day." "That's the man, that's the man," said old Mr. Causey, jerking his head in an excited manner. "He's a blackguard. I tell you he's a blackguard. He jilted my wife's sister. She was 20 years younger than my wife, jilted her a week before her marriage, and would never give a reason. And she went mad, and is in a madhouse now. I should like to have the ruin of him for it. I should like to drive him into the poorhouse." Mr. Quest and Edward looked at each other, and the old man let his head fall back exhausted. "Now, goodbye, Mr. Quest. They'll give you a bit of dinner downstairs," he said at length. "I'm getting tired, and I want to hear the rest of that money article. You've done very well for Causey and Son, and Causey and Son will do well for you, for we always pay by results. That's the way to get good work and make a lot of money. Mind, Edward, if ever you get a chance, don't forget to pay that blackguard Quaritch out pound for pound, and twice as much again for compound interest. He, he, he." "The old gentleman keeps his head for business pretty well," said Mr. Quest to Edward Causey as soon as they were well outside the door. "Keeps his head," answered Edward. "I should just think he did. He's a regular shark now, that's what he is. I really believe that if he knew I had found the 30,000 for old de la Molle, he would cut me off with a shilling." Here Mr. Quest pricked up his ears. "And he's close too, so close that it is almost impossible to get anything out of him. I am not particular, but upon my word I think that it is rather disgusting to see an old man with one foot in the grave hanging on to his money bags as though he expected to float to heaven on them." "Yes," said Mr. Quest, "it is a curious thing to think of, but you see money is his heaven." "By the way," said Edward as they entered the study, "that's queer about that fellow Quaritch, isn't it? I never liked the look of him, with his pious air." "Very queer, Mr. Causey," said he, "but do you know, I almost think that there must be some mistake. I do not believe that Colonel Quaritch is the man to do things of that sort without a very good reason. However, nobody can tell, and it's a long while ago. A long while ago or not, I mean to let him know my opinion of him when I get back to Boisingham," said Edward viciously. By Jove, it's 20 minutes past 6.